Hello, this is Will Harling, Director of the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council, and I'm thankful for the opportunity from UC A&R Co-op Extension to share some of my experiences prescribed burning in mixed conifer tan oak forests. You can see the title, Some of What You Need to Know to Implement a Successful Burn. The ranges of Douglas fir and tan oak overlap in a relatively narrow band along the coast of Northern California, grading into the western Klamath Mountains, with a few isolated patches on the western slope of the northern Sierras. Douglas fir tan oak forests occurred historically primarily on northerly exposures and in canyon bottoms. However, fire exclusion over the past century has supported their expansion onto southern exposures, oak woodlands, and meadows. As you can see in these slides, Redcap Glade on the left was a traditional gathering area as late as the 1940s. If you fast forward today to 2005, it no longer exists on the landscape. It's been completely infilled with Douglas fir and tan oak. And similarly in this photo from Big Rock looking upriver in the town of Orleans, you can see both in the foreground and the background extensive infilling of vegetation between the late 1800s and 2006. This forest type is particularly difficult to burn in, as the ideal burn windows for stands on north-facing slopes often go out of prescription after the first fall rains, while stands on south slopes have the potential for stand replacing fire once fire is established in the canopy. These forests typically occur where fire has long been absent, with abnormally high fuel loading and stand density levels, as you can see in this photo of a Western Klamath Restoration Partnership field trip to Doug fir tan oak stand on the south-facing slope. Just for review, this is indicative of what you would see in a north-facing Doug fir tan oak stand here from the spring prescribed burn at Butler Flat. Even with the danger that comes along with prescribed burning in Doug fir tan oak stands, prescribed fire has proven to be a valuable tool in reducing both stem density and fuel loading, even as a standalone treatment. After nearly 20 years of burning in this forest type in the Western Klamath Mountains, weighing safety, treatment costs, and ecological effects, our preferred treatment sequence is to implement linear, manual, and/or mechanical thinning along the perimeter of the stand or the nearest control feature, followed by prescribed burning, often with fire as an initial treatment in the interior of the unit. In most cases, we will conduct pullback on legacy trees, save trees, and jackpot prep in the interior of the unit prior to burning to minimize canopy loss. Where timber production is a management goal, pullback of duff and fuels 3 to 5 feet around the bowl of the tree in the fire footprint will reduce the impacts to Doug fir. If there's funding for manual and mechanical thinning prior to burning and the topography supports these treatments, prescribed fire is also a useful tool post-thinning to reduce activity fuels and residual ground fuels, as seen here in a plot on the lower Salmon River. While pullback at the base of legacy save trees is critical for minimizing prescribed fire impacts to these trees, scraping moss to prevent fire getting established in tree cavities has proven ineffective, as embers usually carry fire above the scrape line. Unfortunately, fire in aerial tan oak cavities poses a significant risk, as they can smolder for days from the inside out, often unnoticed, and fall suddenly with little noise. We almost lost a firefighter in 2015 on a prescribed burn when the top half of an 80-foot tall tan oak dropped right where the firefighter was mopping up in the draw below. Pre-wetting cavities along the fire line where most mop-up occurs, and GPSing locations of smoking cavities that can't be doused from fire line hose lays, and then mapping them for future patrol resources is a small but critical step to minimizing firefighter risk exposure and burning in this forest type. Unit layout is critical to a successful burn. Unit boundaries should be aligned with roads, large streams, or strong topographic breaks, as seen in these pictures with significant ridge lines to the lower left. On the upper left strip, there's a skid road, and on the lower right is an old, large mining ditch. Mid-slope hand lines are less than ideal and should only be used as control features on the cool side of prescriptions. So I just want to talk a little bit now about specific prescribed burn parameters, namely timing, prescription, and other environmental parameters such as temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, probability of emission or PIG, and then finally burn effects and monitoring and return intervals. The ideal time for burning in this forest type is early fall, September through October, before significant precipitation, or in the late spring, i.e. June. Spring burning often requires extensive mop-up to eliminate the potential for holdover, especially when stumps or 1,000-hour fuels are present. While this graph shows preponderance of potential burn days in the spring, burn effects during April and May have more severe negative effects to plants putting on fresh growth and animals who have young that are unable to get out of the burn area. There is no natural historic fire at this time, so plants and animals generally have not evolved to fire then as they have to fire between June through March of the following year. The Karuk tribe has a cultural prohibition against the use of fire for anything other than heating and cooking in this April to May window. We typically do not burn from mid-June to mid-September just for safety reasons because of excessive fuel loading and the fire deficit. As this graph shows, the first 2 weeks of October are the most dependable fall window with opportunities through the fall and into the winter. Specific burn window timing may vary across the Doug-fir-tan-oak forest range. During recent droughts, ideal burn windows have extended into December. Multiple day burns are only advisable when weather forecasts and certain subsequent days will not exceed the high end of the prescription, when weather forecasts are certain and subsequent days will not exceed the high end of the prescription. A 2018 Klamath Trex burn, the 60-acre Ishipisha unit, required 2 days to burn successfully. 90 to 100% slopes with 100 plus years since last fire, and fire as an initial entry with homes directly below, required great care and well thought out firing operations to keep it within the unit boundaries and minimize firefighter exposure to rollout. A team of 6 lighters used a top to bottom vertical zigzag ignition pattern using both dots and strips based on fuel accumulation, starting as soon as the fuels were receptive and finishing the burn the day before a red flag event. Individual parameters should be taken as guides, as successful burns can be accomplished in this forest type across highly variable conditions. High temperatures, low humidities might be needed if fuel moistures are high, i.e. 12 to 14% for 1 to 100 hour fuels, and low temperatures and high humidities are acceptable if the fuel moisture readings are very low in the 6 to 8% range. Any temperatures below 95 degrees Fahrenheit are acceptable typically, depending on other environmental variables. It is often hard to get permits when burn plans allow for ignitions at temperatures above 85 degrees. It is good to consult with your local permitting officer to gauge their comfort level on the high-end prescription parameters. Higher fuel moistures and humidities might require temperatures on the higher end of the range to get adequate consumption. However, they may also cause rapid drying and more severe fire effects than intended. I learned a hard lesson on this photo here on the right, where there's 2 large legacy firs that are engaged. This was a unit we had unsuccessfully burned because it was too wet the previous 2 years, and thought we had a good window. However, because of the several years of drought, these trees ended up falling over in the next winter. Relative humidity levels between 25 and 50% are ideal. North-facing sites can be burned successfully with RH as low as 20%, and south-facing sites may be burned with RH as high as 70% if fuels are dry enough. Potential for spot fires increases greatly below 20% RH. Ignition patterns and timing can be used to achieve burn objectives across the range of humidities. This prescribed burn on the switchback unit in Orleans during the 2016 Klamath Treks was lit as a head fire to get consumption, as RH levels and fuel moistures were high from a rain event 3 days prior. Wind speed. Any eye-level wind speed below 5 miles per hour is ideal. However, if you are on flat slope with very low slope, you may need some wind to drive the fire across the unit. If 1 to 100 hour fuel moistures are high, i.e. 12 to 14%, wind and slope can be your friend. These forests are often closed canopy and only affected by 20-foot winds on ridges where they may pose a problem for containment. For probability of ignition or PIG, typically we stop and focus on holding when the PIG reaches or exceeds 60%. Holding concerns outside the unit should be heavily factored in when making this decision. We're going to switch to fire effects now. Typical canopy mortality varies between 5 and 10% on our burns, depending on fuel loading, weather parameters, and ignition patterns. Canopy mortality can be minimized or increased to meet specific management objectives by varying the timing of the burn, as in night versus day, and ignition patterns, strip versus dot, and your strip width and timing. Timing and ignition patterns can be used to achieve specific outcomes even within the same unit. On October 4th, 2015, we burned the 70-acre West Sims unit near Orleans, California, beginning at 6 p.m. as we came out of a red flag warning through the night, finishing at 7 a.m. the next morning. The upper portion of the unit was owned by the Karuk tribe, whose express management goal was to restore oak woodland and meadow habitat encroached on by Douglas fir tan oak forest. The lower portion of the unit was owned by Downs Ranch, who was actively managing for timber. We began burning at the high end of the prescription and used unburned piles in tight rapid strips to initiate crown scorch, with an average canopy mortality around 15% on the upper end owned by the tribe. By 2 a.m., when we had burned onto the Downs Ranch property, we switched to dot ignitions, and lower temps and higher RH allowed us to keep canopy mortality well below 5%. This unit had a 100-foot wide manual perimeter fuels treatment and was bound on 2 sides by roads and 1 side by a hand line along a ridge. We pre-plumb all hand lines with hose lays, with laterals every 200 feet for slopes less than 80%, every 100 feet for slopes greater than 80% for rapid response to spot or engaged trees along the fire line. The West Sims unit had not seen fire in over 100 years, and duff levels were up to 10 inches thick in places. In one night, we treated and consumed approximately 1,000 tons of dead fuel. We are planning a maintenance burn in 2020 to remove the dead standing fuel and expect to have restored meadow and oak woodland habitats within this predominant Doug fir tan oak forest by the 3rd entry in 2027. Typical return intervals vary from 3 to 15 years. However, we have had success burning stands on the cool end of a prescription year 1, targeting jackpot fuels, then returning year 2 in the hot end of the prescription to consume ground fuels that were not receptive in year 1, which is what we did here on this Pond Ambush Canyon prescribed burn unit that we burnt jackpot fuels in 2016, which was instrumental in us being able to hold the fire line when we burned in a dryer window in 2017. Cultural fire effect. Doug fir tan oak forests provide many cultural resources to native peoples, including tan oak acorns, huckleberries, hazel for baskets, elk, and many more resources. Ongoing studies through the Western Klamath Restoration Partnership are furthering knowledge of how, where, when, and why prescribed fire can enhance production of these and other cultural resources. Consulting WKRP and local tribes and tribal cultural practitioners in the burn planning phase can improve burn prescriptions and outcomes. Fire effects. Typical canopy mortality varies between 5 and 10% depending on fuel loading, weather parameters, and ignition patterns. This site was burned in the 2014 Klamath Treks On the berry unit, we had closer to 80% canopy mortality after the prescribed burn, as you can see in the center of this picture. In hindsight, even though we had low flame length, typically less than 4 feet, we had thick layer of slash from previous mastication treatment. That combined with the drought caused extensive canopy mortality. So it is key to look at those other factors. Lop and scatter can be a tool for eliminating or reducing stump sprouting, small diameter shrubs, and hardwoods. Care must be taken to vary the amount of scattered fuels to not overly impact retention trees and soil resources. This 2015 Klamath Trex burn at Butler Creek, as evidenced by the white ash, had too much lop and scatter given the humidity and fuel moisture at the time of the burn. Collaboration with partners and permitting agencies is key to developing trust for prescribed burning in Doug fir tan oak forests. With the potential for escape being more variable and less understood in this vegetation type, go, no-go decisions should be made collaboratively to daylight potential issues and build support. As we've seen, there's been a spate of large wildfires in the Doug fir tan oak forest type in the past decade throughout Northwest California. I don't think I need to tell anybody watching this presentation that there's a lot that hangs in the balance with these burns, and that doesn't mean we don't accept the risk. It just means that we look for opportunities to burn more safely. And I wanted to close with this slide from the Salmon River, where we used recent wildfire footprints, in this case the 2006 Solms fire footprint, the 2008 Yukonom complex, and the 2013 Butler fire footprint, to minimize the potential for escape for prescribed burning through the Klamath Trex in 2015 on the Butler Flat property. It's all about minimizing risk and engaging all the partners that have a stake in the burn. So with that, I'll end. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to call me, Will Harling, at 530-739-3960, or email me at will@micwick.org. This project was funded through a USDA Western Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Project and coordinated by the University of California Cooperative Extension. Thank you very much.